Thank you, Scott.
Forward and back.
All right. Good morning. How are you all doing? Wonderful. All right. Well, I'm going to start out this session with a little bit of overview of some of the many things happening around marketing technology, Martech, and AI. I'm going to go through a fair number of slides relatively quickly just for an orientation on that. This entire deck, I'll provide it to Scott as a PDF. There's a bunch of data in there that, believe me, you're not going to want to have to like jot down here as we're going through them. You'll be able to look at the whole deck shortly. And then from there, Sara will come up, will join me. We'll start with a little bit of some fireside chat of some of the questions she and I have been debating for a while on this, but open it up to you as well. And then we will wrap from there. So, I don't know if any of you have ever seen that crazy landscape of all these different marketing technology solutions. If you have, I apologize. I've inflicted that upon the world. Starting in 2011, mapped it out. Saw around 150 marketing technologies 14 years ago, which at the time seemed like a lot. And then year over year, as we kept charting the new ones that entered the market, it just kept growing exponentially to the point the one we released last month had over 15,000 solutions. Now, I know you might be looking at that and thinking, that's really hard to read. Don't worry, I can zoom in. Actually, to read this, you really do need the proper equipment. And in many ways, right, this has become a completely useless slide. There's a version of it online, Martech map, you can use to zoom, filter, search. But if it says one thing, it says that the Martech landscape is just incredibly diverse. You know, it's probably at this point in time just easier to think about it from a numeric perspective. You know, that year over year, it's been about a 40% compound annual growth rate. And you'll see actually from 2023 to 2024, we saw this massive acceleration. You're probably wondering, now what happened around 2023 that would have created a whole bunch more software? And yes, the ChatGPT heard around the world. So when we actually looked at where the growth was in 2023 to 2024, there was this explosion of like all sorts of new tools for sales and for commerce, all sorts of AI agents and GPTs to help, and of course also with content and experience. In many ways, this first wave of generative AI has been like a huge benefit to people doing content development. This past year, we continued to see growth. It was around 9%, which again, when you have 14,000 products, you know, 9% growth is still quite a lot. But you could see that the growth distribution was a little bit more even. And so people often ask me like, oh, what's the hot category in Martech? And the thing that's really wild is it's not a hot category. It's pretty much every facet of the marketing technology tools we're using are continuing to advance. There's continuing to be new startups. It's a very rich field. Now, showing it as a map of like unreadable little logos actually doesn't do a very good job of representing what the industry looks like. That if we actually took all those companies and we ordered them based on their approximate scale, we would get what folks call a long tail distribution, which is there's like a handful, you know, 10, 20, 30 major platforms, major companies, you know, mostly public companies that, you know, are in the head. They have the widest possible distribution, you know, companies like Progress, companies like Hubspot, where I work. You then have hundreds and hundreds of companies that are category leaders, you know, the best platform out there for, you know, social media management. And then you start to get into this long tail. We have all these products for like specialized verticals. We see products in specialized regions of the world. The hottest e-commerce platform in Poland is not Shopify, Salesmonago. You start to see like products around these ecosystem platforms. You even see more and more services companies packaging up their software. Very diverse. Now, the right half of this, what I'm calling the hypertail, this is a little bit different. This isn't even about commercially developed software. This is about the increase in custom-built software. And we'll come back to that in a minute. All right. One thing I would note, this is where we are with software today, is there are software companies to help you manage all the software companies that you have subscriptions to, right? Love that. SaaS management platforms, one of them is called Xylo. They manage the tech stacks for hundreds and hundreds of companies, and one of the things they do every year is they publish the aggregate data of how many software subscriptions do most companies have. And in mid-sized companies, 500 to 2,500 employees on average, will go with the median, not the mean, 232 SaaS subscriptions. It's a very diverse tech stack. And this is after years of the CFO banging on the table saying, we got to cut back on these subscriptions that we don't need. But of course, nobody wants to just talk about software at this point. Everybody wants to talk about AI and AI software. And so my collaborator, Franz Remersma, and I, we recently published a report, The State of Martech 2025, that Progress generously sponsored for us as well, too. And we did a survey of a number of marketing ops and Martech leaders trying to understand where AI was actually appearing in marketing in the Martech stack. And you've probably all seen at various points in times Roger Everett's diffusion of technology curve, this idea you have a small number of innovators, they move to early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards. You may have also heard of Jeffrey Moore became very famous for talking about the chasm that often exists, trying to cross from early adopter to early majority when a technology gets adopted. And if I can slightly abuse the way in which people are supposed to think about this distribution, when we surveyed people as to what AI technologies they were using in marketing, it was interesting that the different categories fell at different stages along that distribution curve. We do still have laggards out there who are what AI. I feel like I should apologize. I'm from the country that's not east or west, but south. And we had a politician on TV a couple months ago who was referring to it as A1. We really need to have a good A1 strategy here. So I'm going to say, yeah, we have our fair share of laggards out there. A lot of people, really at the late majority, are using AI very often without even knowing it. Just the other week, Google announced AI mode being distributed throughout their search environment. So people are just going to start getting the benefit of that without having to consciously adopt it. What's probably the most interesting category is we could actually say things like ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude have crossed the chasm into the early majority of people who are using these assistants to a greater or lesser degree. Where the chasm happens is there's a lot of talk about how agents and agentic workflows can be more embedded into MarTech and marketing. And that is where we're still quite early, but I'll give you a little bit of data about what's happening there. So, and again, my blog, chiefmartech.com, we have a post up there that you can download the State of Martech report. It's ungated. Just grab the PDF anytime you want. All this data, is from there. So we started, of course, just asking people, where do they see their company at in the AI adoption curve? And not surprisingly, the vast majority are either just purely in an experimental pilot stage or starting to have limited use in some marketing workflows. And I start by saying this because if you feel like, oh man, we're just dipping our toe in the water, are we behind? The answer is no, actually you're not behind. Most people are still very much at that dipping their toe in the water stage. Again, the number one thing we see people playing with in marketing is these standalone AI assistants. And ChatGPT really did get the first mover advantage there. They have nearly twice as much adoption, at least in the group we surveyed. But then you see the distribution with Microsoft Copilot, Google Gemini, Anthropic Claude, Perplexity, and so on. So one of the next things we asked is okay, you're using standalone AI assistants. How do you feel about using AI assistants or copilots in your Martech tools? And that you start to see now the adoption dropped significantly. There are maybe a quarter of our respondents said, oh yeah, there's an AI assistant in my CRM. I'm using that. Starting to see some of that with marketing automation or customer engagement platforms, but still very early. But if you look at all these vendors' websites, they're all pushing forward with adding more and more of those capabilities natively. It's going to be one of the really interesting things to see is where do we use standalone AI assistants like ChatGPT or Claude, and where do we use more specialized tools built into our MarTech platforms? Now, again, because we primarily were serving Martech and marketing operations people, we could sort of get a little technical. I asked them, okay, well, how are you doing as far as integrating AI into your Martech stack more broadly? And here you see like about 40% say, okay, we've been able to do that, or took a little bit of work, but we're starting to get some workflows going. But the majority have still found like either they haven't tried that yet or have found it difficult. And so this is where you sort of see that chasm of like, when you're talking about actually embedding it into our Martech workflows, it's still innovators and early adopters. Now, in the report, we go into a lot of other different use cases, but there's a couple I just wanted to highlight because I think they're really exciting for the creativity they're going to unlock for marketing. One of them, this is probably the one I'm most excited about at the moment, is that these generative AI LLM engines are really good at understanding unstructured data. Things like call recordings and meeting transcripts and emails and RFPs and support tickets. And this is amazing because there's so much insight with customers that has been locked in that unstructured data that for the most part has been inaccessible to marketers, at least in any sort of programmatic way. Now that's starting to be unlocked. So we're starting to see for those companies that are leaning into how do we incorporate this into our marketing workflow, they're looking at that unstructured data and finding ways to start to use that for decisioning in their workflows. Who should we contact? What should the messaging be? What segment are they in? And how we start to personalize the messaging for them. And so we have a bit of data on those specific use cases. And again, a lot of it is being used to like summarize and absorb that data, condense to an insight, and then be able to take action on it. We did ask like, okay, well now that you're not just having an assistant, but you're starting to try and get some of this automated, what tools are you using for that? 44%, the largest group, are using automation tools in their core MarTech platform. Whether that's a DXP or a CRM or a marketing automation tool, because they've had workflows in most of those tools already. Now they're just sort of augmenting that with AI features in those workflows. Another 20% or so are using these products we used to call iPaaS, which stood for Integration Platform as a Service, things like Zapier and Make and Workato. Those tools have been advancing to also become very agentic. That's the good buzzword we use these days, agentic. And then we're starting to see some of these new generation tools, specific AI platforms, AI agent platforms, but very, very again, with like 8% adoption there, that's clearly, it's not even in the early adopter stage, it's the innovator experimenter stage. And then the last piece of data from that report I just wanted to share was, we're also starting to see folks get comfortable with the idea of exposing AI agents directly to customers. Now, the number one use case that has gotten traction has been doing this for chatbots on the website. Now, you might say, this is not particularly innovative. We have had these chat services on websites for quite some time. And the technical assessment is they've largely sucked. Right? I mean, they just haven't been very good because they required, people to really program these things and program the way in which they were going to respond almost deterministically to things. There's just too many use cases. Here comes LLMs, and they're great at two things that have changed the game there. One is, by their very nature, it is easy for them to be conversational and deeply conversational, very natural in their conversation. And because they can also understand unstructured data, on the back end, you hook them up to your knowledge bases, you hook them up to your history of support ticket resolutions, and all of a sudden, you can now have these chatbots actually really good. We're seeing in a number of these customer service use cases, it's not unusual now for 50, 60, 70% of incoming support requests to be successfully resolved by the AI agent, by the AI chatbot. And I think as long as you have a very easy mechanism to get from the AI agent to a human agent as needed, this can actually create a great customer experience. Now, some of these other use cases of do we want to use agents to reach out to customers, to prospects, this is a mixed bag. And as you probably, we could talk about this perhaps in our chat as well too. Just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should do something. So I think this is one of the areas where marketers are frankly still experimenting of where can we provide agents and automations that customers will find helpful, and where would it just be annoying? Lots of fun discovery ahead. And you thought the landscape graphic I showed you was going to be the most nerdy slide. This is definitely one as a takeaway in the report or the slides here. What I want to do here is this is a schematic that's roughly showing many of the different kinds of marketing technology tools that we see in tech stacks. Now let me first disclaim, your tech stack probably doesn't include all of these, most of these. It might only include a few. It might be like, hey, we have a CMS, maybe we have a data warehouse, maybe we have a marketing automation tool. That's fine. The only reason I put a few different things here is because I want to show from an industry perspective where we saw these tools sitting, and what I would propose is this intermediary tech stack between the old world of how Martech was organized and the new world where we're headed in, where AI is going to play a bigger role. And the main point of this is I essentially see three layers to this. You know, there is very much consolidation happening around the data layer. And we still have this concept of systems of record or systems of truth. You know, what am I referring to as my, digital asset management platform? What am I using as my, customer record source of truth? And these things are not going away in an AI world. In fact, actually, they become even more powerful in an AI world because they become these sources of truth that AI agents are able to refer to and leverage that data. We see up above that, more and more of what we've typically called the systems of engagement. I've started calling them systems of context because they're very good at taking the data we have below and either for our own staff and employees or for our customers and prospects, using that data in a context-specific way to help answer their questions, to help move them forward in the buyer's journey. And then all of that is sort of like dotted line around most of what we see with AI right now sits on top of this. It's a way of augmenting it. It's a way of actually hyper-personalizing the context. Again, not just for customers, but for employees and marketing as well, too. And we think, for these next few years at least, this is roughly the relationship we're going to see between these technologies. AI is not eliminating the Martech stack as you've known it, but it is evolving it, and it is acting as a layer on top of that. Oh, by the way, we often, for years when we talk about Martech stacks, we kind of draw them as a stack, like these nice boxes that fit on top of each other. And of course, in reality, that's not actually what it looks like. It'd be closer to say it's almost like a graph. You have different nodes and they connect to each other in different ways. Okay, sorry, that was a little nerdy aside. There's a lot of nerdy asides in this, I have to apologize. So I want to now step back and talk a little bit about okay, well, the Martech world overall, how is this evolving? And I would say there's been two ages of Martech so far. The first one, what I call the first age of Martech, was frankly, it was all about dichotomies. It was like, oh, okay, are you going to go with a suite, or are you going to assemble best-of-breed tools? Which, you're kind of like, well, I want a little bit of both. You were either a software company or a services company. You were either thinking about, well, we're going to build this, or we're going to buy this. And again, the reality was we actually wanted blends of these things. And so over the past 10 years, we started to shift into what I would define as the second age of Martech as a little bit more of a convergence here, where it wasn't just suite versus best of breed, but it was platform ecosystems. Yes, you get core systems at the center of your stack, but they're open. They have ecosystems of other products that integrate with them. You started to see software companies offering more services. You started to see services companies offer more software. And people stopped having so much the build versus buy debate, as if these were black and white choices, but really started to think about it as oh yeah, okay, we'll have these core platforms and then we'll build customizations on top of it. What I'm seeing here with AI, so much so that I actually think it is a third age of Martech we're entering, is just as each one of those rows blended, I think they're starting to converge together as well too. That AI is going to make it increasingly easy for so many different software and agents. People talk about not just software as a service, but services as software. That's a clever trick of that. Of just allowing these things to interact with each other in a much more composable canvas. I think this is a particularly great opportunity for services companies. Now, when I use this word composable, I don't know, some of you might be having an allergic reaction to it. Just like agentic is now, composable has been kind of a bit of a buzzword. What does it even mean? Well, You know, composing takes many different forms. I mean, you could say a Martech stack that has multiple tools in it. This is a composed set of capabilities, right? You're composing multiple products together. You have platforms that are specifically focused on doing composition within them. We talk about composable DXPs and, you know, composable CDPs. You have to have a 3-letter acronym to get anywhere in this industry. And then actually, what are we creating for customers, right? We're creating experiences for them, touch points, that they themselves are often composed of multiple pieces of data and multiple services. So composition sort of goes through the entire through line of marketing and MarTech. And I'm going to go even further than that and say, actually, composability, it's not new at all. This has been around pretty much from the beginning with software. And in this diagram, it's like I give a bunch of different examples of composability from more technical to less technical. And I'll just give 2 examples here. Like one is the way in which software programmers have always built software. It's always been composable. No software developer worth their salt builds everything from scratch in assembly language. You know, they like take libraries of existing functionality. They might call APIs out in the cloud, and they compose these things together. It's a very efficient way. On the opposite end of the spectrum with business users, I propose to you that a spreadsheet is a classic example of composability. What do you do with a spreadsheet? I could take multiple different kinds of data, blend them together in interesting ways, and create something new. So composability is sort of baked into almost everything we do with technology. Now what's exciting is historically, the technical skills required to tap that composability were pretty significant. The spreadsheets in many ways were the exception to the rule. But with AI, what we're starting to see is these things that typically required a lot of specialized technical skill are increasingly like moving to a place where less and less technical people are able to tap them to compose things together. I want to give you a really extreme example here. And I'm going to try and convince you that in the next 120 seconds, you are all going to be bona fide software engineers. So I went to ChatGPT a couple months ago. I asked it, please create a stacked area chart of the market cap of the 10 most valuable companies in the world each year from 2000 to 2024, and categorize it by tech companies versus non-tech companies. And you know, a couple seconds later, I've got my graph. It's kind of cool, right? We see the orange non-tech companies, the yellow tech companies. Mark Andreessen famously said software is eating the world. Certainly was eating the stock market. That wasn't hard. Well, you know, an interesting thing is if you actually click through on what ChatGPT did here. I have a bigger version of that. It actually created, on the fly, a little Python program, collected the data, created a Python program, used that to generate the chart, and did that. Had I not clicked on the little, like, how did you do this thing, I would have had no idea that a piece of software was written and run on my behalf from what was my simple English language request. This is the start of a really fundamentally, radically powerful change in how everyone is going to be able to tap custom software. You know, we've been on this journey of democratization of marketing technology for a long while. And the way I've always thought about it is, you know, most technology starts with discipline experts. You have to be an expert in that technology. You have to work in IT. You have to be a software person to even know what it does. And then over time, you know, it starts to hand over more to domain experts, which in marketing we would think of as like marketing ops or MarTech people. And then eventually, you know, power users and users. And as it goes through that, the cost of using these things continues to drop. And, you know, basic economics, as the cost drops, the volume generally tends to increase. And this is what we've seen over like 15 years of MarTech. It's sort of evolved from being entirely in IT to increasingly having a lot of it in marketing ops, to increasingly marketers themselves on the front line being empowered with more and more of these tools directly. And the way in which these tools work have changed, right? With IT, it was a lot of getting into the code. Many of you remember the early days of building websites, you know, and then low code, no code. And then this thing I showed you, why we call AI agents creating dynamic programs. if it's so easy to create a program on demand and have it run and do what you want, and you didn't even have to think about that, I mean, we're looking at a world where my silly little landscape of like 15,000, Martech software products, millions, billions, trillions of like little specialized software programs being created on the fly to serve your marketing needs' wildest desires. There's a whole new set of tools coming out for making it easier and easier. Like one I've been playing around with, become very popular, is Lovable. Create apps, just natural language. One of the original scientists from OpenAI, Andrej Karpathy, a couple of years ago said, hey, the hottest new programming language is English. He's kind of right. One aside, this is one of those nerdy asides I warned you about. There was an article a couple months ago in Ars Technica. It was one of these like code developer things. Apparently it had been trained on like, Stack Overflow, where people would like post homework problems and people would answer, hey, you gotta learn how to do this yourself. One of the problems of training on data on the internet, you don't always know what you're gonna get. So anyways, this guy's using this coding, it says it has to do something, and like just refused. It said, no, you should learn how to program yourself. So we're getting to a place where the AI agents are gonna say, no, you do the work for me now. Oh God, all right, scary world. All right, almost to the end of this. Just a couple like framing ways I wanna have us change the way we think about operating in this environment. And one of them is this model that's called the Cynefin framework. It was created by a fellow in 1999, Dave Snowden. It's a way about thinking of different kinds of environments in which we manage and make decisions. And he had these 4 quadrants. The first is what he called clear environments, where it's like, oh, simple cause and effect. Best practice, I do X, Y happens. It's very easy to see. It's like squeezing, a citrus fruit on a juicer. Be pretty clear what's going to happen. His next category was what he called complicated. And here, cause and effect are still deterministically related to each other. If you do A, well, all right, if you do A, it will do B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on, and you will get to Z. And every time you do A, Z is going to happen, but it's a very complex and winding path. So for the example, this is thinking about something like a Ferrari. It's a very precise machine. Now, if you woke up this morning and your Ferrari did not start, any of you have that problem? You would not call me, because I would kick it. And that probably wouldn't start, right? But you'd have to take it to like a trained Ferrari mechanic who could debug that and probably charge you more than what you paid for the car in the first place. Then we switch into a world of the complex. And we're used to thinking of complex and complicated as synonyms. But in Snowden's world, it was actually something very different. In complex, his metaphor for this was like a rainforest. Yes, there's causes and effects. Things are interrelated to each other, but they don't have that same sort of predictable precision. And the way in which we operate in that has to be a lot more of, not the official rule books of things, but a little bit of this constant sense and respond and adaptation. And then his 4th category, chaotic, his example was like, if the building's on fire, yeah, it's also got some of that complexity, but like there's sort of no sense and response. Just run for the exit. That's not official advice from this building, by the way. Please proceed calmly to the exit. All right, where's I headed with all this? Is a lot of what we've done for managing Martech and marketing operations for the past decade, 2 decades, has been treating it basically as a complicated machine. It's all these pieces. You really probably do need someone who understands it in depth to be able, configure it and make sure it's maintained and working well. But it generally, causes and effects are tightly related. What we're seeing is now with more of this AI agentic capabilities feeding into Martech and marketing tech stacks, that it's starting to take on more of a complex environment, particularly as we start to empower more and more people throughout marketing to be able to do more and more, hey, ChatGPT, can you do this little program for me? And this isn't a bad thing. In fact, actually, it can be an incredibly powerful thing. But it requires us to start to think about a different way of managing. And one way to think about this is, for Those of you who've been around for a while, right? For years we talked about big data. This was the big challenge. Like, how are we going to deal with the scale and complexity of all this data collected, stored, analyzed? I would say we're shifting into a world where big data isn't the challenge. It's really big ops. It's like, okay, on top of this data, we are now going to have all these apps and agents and automations doing all sorts of interesting things. But they're all interacting with each other in very interesting ways. This becomes that complex environment. We have to learn new ways to manage. And maybe a better metaphor for this is if big data was like a lake high up in the mountains, and you needed a professional data scientist Sherpa to guide you up there, peer in its depth for wisdom. Big ops, it's like the same huge body of water, but it's more like an interactive water park. We're kind of all in there splashing together. Again, this isn't necessarily good or bad, but it's just a very different environment that we're trying to adapt to. And this is exciting for those of us in marketing, because I know one of the questions that comes up is, hey, what's going to happen with jobs in marketing? Where is AI going to help grow things? Where's it going to shrink things? And if I can grossly oversimplify marketing, I've always thought of it in 3 buckets. There's strategy and creative, which is what most people think of when they think of marketing. That's always the thing we put on the pedestal. But as much as we value it, the actual amount of time and calories we spend on it is relatively small. Most of the calories and time have gone into this bucket of production analysis, all the work required to actually bring that strategy and creative to life. And then there's been Martech and marketing operations that also, in the scheme of things, has been a relatively small investment for most companies. I think what we're seeing with AI here, wow, this is like a really thin shadow. It's not entirely going away. There'll still be production analysis, but it's going to shrink the amount of time we have to spend to it. And we're going to value that less and less. Now, short-sighted companies, in my opinion, will pocket that efficiency gain and just call it a day. Oh, we just need fewer people in marketing, done. I think that'd be a huge mistake, because this benefit is going to accrue to everyone, every single company. That efficiency gain is not a competitive advantage. The only way you turn this into a competitive advantage is you take that resourcing and that time and that calories and you reinvest it in these other 2 buckets. You're like, wow, okay, now we aren't as constrained by the production and analysis. We can actually lean in to do more creative. We can be more experimental. We can try more ideas. And we should probably be investing more in the Martech team, the marketing op folks who enable and support that. All right, this is my last slide thing, and then Sara and I are going to come up and take this conversation in, I think, a few interesting directions. I want to start by saying, if you've been watching this for 30 minutes and you're like, oh man, I need a nap. I know the feeling. I want to assure you, you are not alone. This is what every single company on the planet is going through. And the way I think of it in the large terms is we're dealing in a time of technology changing at an exponential rate. Actually, we've been at this for decades. Moore's law, the doubling of computing power, since the 70s. We as humans, we as organizations of humans, we do not change exponentially. And this has kind of been the crux that we've been in now, particularly these past couple decades, of the technology change keeps accelerating. It's really hard for us as companies to adapt to this. Not hard for you, it's hard for everyone. And the bad news is, I have no magic bullet to this. There's not a simple answer I can give you that's just going to do this and that will be changing exponentially. What I can say is there are 2 strategies I consistently see companies do that navigate this. The first is they're very intentional about which changes to pursue. Because there's just too many things changing all at once. If you try and spread yourself across all of them, it's just not going to get any real momentum. Be strategic about what are the changes most relevant to your business, your customers. And then the second is, while no company changes at an exponential rate, some companies are better at changing than others. For a long time here in marketing, we've talked about agile marketing and agile marketing principles. These things work. It's 2000 calling. They want their website Martech stack back. Oh yeah, well, it was a simpler world then, bless me. Being able to just be a little bit more agile than your competitors is a competitive advantage. There's a group called Agile Sharpers that does a State of Agile Marketing every year report. They actually found that their respondents who had embraced a fully agile operating system for their marketing team were much further along in incorporating AI and experimenting with AI than those who, well, nobody says they're not agile. They're always somewhat agile. And if you combine these two things, I think you've got a recipe in which, like, you're not going to change exponentially. If you can change a little bit faster and better than your competitors, that's going to get you through the adventures we have ahead. All right, so with that, I'd love to introduce Sara to come and join me here. We've got a couple questions we had sort of pre-discussed, but then we'll open it up for any questions that you have. I asked for a fireside chat between two people in the photo I've attached. And I just want to make you sure that, AI isn't always a great artist, I came up with that. So,
I like it.
Shall we leave that? All right.
Let's do it, yeah.
Sara, welcome.
Thank you. Oh, wow. Okay, so there's a ton of data, ton of information you've shared. I think probably for me, the one thing that sticks out is that the future, the AI future, is actually a very human-centric one, right? When we think about all of the things that you've just talked about, we truly need to have a human approach to everything we're doing. And that doesn't, you talked about the jobs, right? Don't be afraid of your job, but your job will change. You and I have talked about the 3 dimensions that we see in that future. And maybe we should unpack those a little bit, right? So, I think, if we talk about what those are to begin with, it's the, democratization of the content creator, right? That's one area. The experimentation to drive more innovation, and diversity for higher creativity. If you combine all 3 of those things, I think you're into your AI strategy, then I think that you're going to see greater leaps forward.
Yeah.
So maybe we should unpack each of those a
Okay,
little
yeah.
bit. What do you think?
No, that sounds good. Well, even starting with the first one there about sort of the range of creative things available. So my background was a software engineer.
Right.
Probably was clear there, this guy's really nerdy. But my affinity has always been towards marketing and marketers. And one of the things I've always admired about marketers is, you saw that movie Jaws? Okay, right, yeah. So, there's this thing, was it Richard Dreyfuss's character is describing the shark, no, that's the other guy. It's like the perfect eating machine. All it does is swim and eat and make baby sharks. To me, I've always thought of marketers as the perfect idea generating machine. This is marketers, one of their superpowers is just that constant curiosity of, waking up with what about this? I wonder what the answer was to this thing, or what if we tried this thing? It's just a fun. This is why marketing is thought of as such a creative profession. That being said, the vast majority of ideas that marketers come up with, they almost nip them in the bud before they even speak them out loud, because they're yeah, no, we wouldn't be able to do that. Nah, it's going to take too long. It's going to cost too much money. And I think what gets exciting here about AI is we're starting to see more and more of these things that marketer has an idea for, either from a prototype perspective, or in some cases even a production perspective, they can actually bring this stuff to life in a fraction of the time, a fraction of the specialized resource. And you and I were talking over dinner. You've got videos, you got music, you've got software. I would like a little web app that does X.
Right.
Where am I going to get a programmer this next week? Right. Let me just ask for it, and it's, hey, here, I've got something. Pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's exciting. I think, and you slightly touched on it, but I'm going to say it because it's something that marketers are creators, right? But do not use AI to generate a blog post, right? That is the last thing. And I think that's the first thing people want to experiment with. And it's good to experiment, it's good to try. But humans still are the ones currently, and a year from now, you and I might be having a different conversation, but we're the only ones that have the capacity for critical thinking and creative thought. So when you think about that, think about how do you take that? Obviously, even when we were talking about video last night, you still have to, you're prompting it. You still have to provide the guidance for, hey, write me a song about Sara and Scott speaking on stage in Toronto, and you have to give it all of the details and information you want. That is not something that AI is doing for you, right? And so I think that when we think about the evolution of the role, that human still has to be in the loop in some capacity.
Yeah. No, and the writing example is good because, yeah, again, like, oh, what do I need to write? I need to write a blog post, or I need to write an email to my boss. There was that Apple commercial about the Slacker. Oh, yeah, no, AI's got me.
Right.
That's a very dystopian, like, commercial in my
100%,
opinion. But, we were talking about an example that, I actually recently did with my team at Hubspot. So I run a partnership team for ISVs, tech partners. I've got these great partner managers. They're trying to now do more field events, wonderful things like this, with their partners. But these are not field event marketing folks. They're partner managers. And we train Claude with okay, here's all the docs you need to know about world-class field events. Here's how you think about developing joint value propositions. Here's the text of the story brand, And then these partner managers were able to say, well, okay, I've got HubSpot and there's this calling platform, AirCall. What could an event be like? And it starts to generate these interesting ideas for them. Oh, wow, that's fascinating. Okay, so for this one, how would I persuade the partner to do that? And it starts to write out a plan for it. Oh, well, what if I need account executives to now start to buy in to invite their prospect? Oh, here's a sequence of Slacks you can send to them. Oh, I don't know, I don't think that's Slack. Oh, yeah, okay, we can modify that. And all of a sudden you saw these folks who, if they had wanted to put together a field event proposal with a partner, it would have been a multi-week process.
Right.
And they would have felt like they lost the agency over a lot of it. And now, literally, in about an hour or so, folks can put together incredibly compelling, and all the writing there now is the writing of, okay, this is the plan, this is the pitch to this audience, this is the email sequence, this is how we're going to follow up. And it's when you start getting into those sorts of examples of using this as writing tools, I think you're seeing something now that's augmenting, what folks do.
Yeah, and if you're training your LLMs on your brand, Franz, our mutual friend, has talked about the brand LLM quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
If you're training that LLM on your tone, on your style, on your, and he even goes as far as to talk about creating, training it on your creators or the founder's persona, right? Because that typically is your brand experience. If you have all of that built in, all of a sudden, everything you've just said becomes exponentially more achievable, right?
Yep.
It's not this promise of AI, it's what's happening right now with AI. And I love that. We talked about that last night, and I think I told you this morning, my head has been spinning ever since we talked about that, because there are so many really interesting and practical use cases for that. And on our end, one of the things we're seeing, my team, I was sharing with you last night, we create a massive amount of content, whether it's blogs or podcasts or live streams, videos, all of those. And for the longest time, our strategy has been through thought leadership and knowledge transfer, knowledge share, right? And we are coming into a world, the world has been turned upside down and inside out, right? Our playbooks from even 5 years ago are gone, right? They don't make any sense anymore because SEO is absolutely important, but zero-click search is taking over the world. I think I saw a stat, and hopefully it wasn't hallucinated, that I believe 80% of all searches done right now today are zero-click search, meaning people are searching, they're getting the answer they need from the LLM or from an agent, and they're never going to the website. What people are also reporting, though, is that the brand, the stronger your brand is, the more likely someone is you'll have fewer visitors and less traffic to your site, but when they come to your site, they're ready to purchase.
Yeah.
And so that changes the game completely. And that, again, it goes back to a very human-centric feel. We as marketers had always talked about having some semblance of control of the customer journey. And in some cases, and probably several decades ago, we did, but humans are chaotic and messy, and as technology advanced and your digital experience became more robust, people had more of an opportunity to choose their own adventure. Mm-hmm. And where we're living now with agents and LLMs, they are 100% in control of that. And so I think, we're sitting down, I challenged everyone on my team to come up with 3 experiments, mm-hmm. just 3, where they could find ways to take the kind of content we have been creating. Does that still resonate? Is it still important? How do we make sure that it still works in this new world? And I'll be happy to report back, hopefully very soon, on what is working and what's not. But again, at the core of all of this is that human behavior.
Yeah, I agree. What do we want to talk a little bit here about, okay, so there's this range of things that people are being empowered to now create.
Right.
There's this other thing here about the volume. And you know, there's that old saying about like, well, more isn't necessarily more.
Yep.
But it's not just about like churning out volume. It's really the pace of experimentation. And there's a quote I love to use to frame this is there's this fellow, Linus Pauling. He was a chemist, won a Nobel Prize. He actually won 2 Nobel Prizes. I think he won the second one as a Nobel Peace Prize. But even on chemistry, he was like sort of renowned for like just so many inventions and so many like discoveries. And so there was an interview in which he was being asked like, how do you do this? Like you come up with so many great ideas. And his answer was, I'll paraphrase this just slightly, was, you know, the best way to have a good idea is to just have a lot of ideas. You know, that for him it was like, oh, like we're constantly trying a vast number of ideas and concepts, most of which don't work out. But it's that, you know, willingness to like just continue to like expand the frontier of things that you're willing to even consider and try. And I think that's where the volume gets really exciting. I mean, again, I might be offending marketers in the room here again. You'll forgive me given my software engineering background. I don't think marketers can actually know in advance what's going to work. You know, when you have a new idea, like you can have a hypothesis, you can have, you know, reasonable belief as to, yeah, I think this could work, but you can't really know. The only way you really know 100%. Is like you get it out into the world and see what happens.
I can't tell you how many times we had projects where we're like, this is going to kill it, and then we're like, oh, that fell flat on its face, and other things that we kind of put out there that were just a fun thing, and it, you know, caught on in a way that we never imagined it would. So 100% agree with that. And you have to be willing to fail, right?
Yes.
And be okay with failure. And the experimentation, I think, is really one of the things that really is exciting to me right now, because for so long you had risk, right? Because it was going to be, okay, if I run this experiment, how much time am I taking away from things that I know are going to actually help move the needle? How much time, you know, what kind of personnel do I need? All of those resources that you were so valuable that I said, if I do X, I can't do Y, right? And now with AI, you have the ability to run a lot of experiments on your own. I think one of the things you had said at one point over the last, you know, couple months as we were talking was, hey, you know, you could have a hypothesis in the morning, set up your AI agents in the afternoon, and have an answer the next day, right? I mean, think about that. That's an incredibly powerful tool.
Yeah. Oh, and even on that, like, by the way, because like traditionally we've always thought like experiments, well, you know, I might need to get this out into the world. I might need to have a certain number of people do this and test it and validate it that way. One of the things we're actually seeing fairly effective is this use of synthetic data, where you actually, okay, I've got a whole set of customers. I've got all this unstructured data history about, you know, how they've engaged with us. You know, you can train an AI engine to basically act as a series of those personas. And like when you come up with that crazy idea, like before you even have to produce anything or like risk anything out in the world, run it by that, see what its reactions are. Oh, what does it like pick up on? What does it find confusing? You know, and again, it's not the same as getting it out there in the audience, but that ability to, again, just very rapidly iterate and even like consider the possibility of something that before we would have like just tamped down as like, yeah, there's no way I'm going to get that tested.
Well, and we're talking about a lot of fun, exciting things. I think the one thing maybe some people in the room might be saying is, okay, that's great, but we have our IT team, we have our security team, we have guardrails. We might even have legal saying, no, can't do that. What are you thinking about when it comes to guardrails and governance? What pieces of advice would you give to marketers in this room as far as what guardrails do you need to have in place so that your legal team doesn't cry when you say, I want to do this, or shut you down completely?
Yeah, the legal team is probably going to be crying for a long time in this world. Yeah, well, this is part of that shift from the complicated to complex environment. Because in complicated, we could have very precise rules and everything's going to follow this procedure. When you get in this mode where you're just expanding the range of like people doing more and more kinds of creative, more people doing that, doing it faster, it doesn't work to like bottleneck all that through. And so you have to shift into a mode where like, okay, we may not have those same sort of like precision rules here, but what we have to have is we have to have like the guardrails. We have to have like, okay, this at a very high level, this is what's permissible, this is what's not. You know, you're seeing companies actually train, you know, these platforms that they're using. I'm like, you will use our version, you know, of the G because we've established, you know, some of these guardrails within it. Still a ton of flexibility and creative opportunity within them. You see folks, you from the IT and security perspective, absolutely vetting, like as we're adopting these things like the agents, like, what is the security of this actual agent platform? What's the permission structure? Like,
Yeah.
I do not want to let something that can like synthesize data be able to, search everybody's private emails and like, oh, by the way, here's what your boss was saying about
Right.
you the other day. What was my boss saying about me the other day? But actually, I mean, again, for a lot of these platforms, that level of like foundational, permission and security management is actually being built into them. And so I think, IT very much has a powerful role to play with like making sure the platforms that are adopted and the guardrails configured within them are solid, while at the same time like empowering people to say like, okay, well, within those,
Right.
go have fun, go
Right.
experiment, go
Right.
forth, multiply
Right.
ideas.
Well, and one of the things Scott and I talked about this morning. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's actually where I was going to go with that. So one of the things we talked about this morning was we're both very excited about the experimentation, about the direction AI is going. I mean, there's obviously some trepidation in some areas, but for the most part, very exciting. Is that the same, does everybody else in this room have that same level of excitement? How many people are excited about where we are in an AI-driven world? And I'll take off my glasses so I can see. Okay, so a good chunk of people. But I think that's where, for us, and one of the things we've talked about quite a bit is making sure that we're sharing where we think the practical uses of this are and where to start. Because to your point at the very beginning, you're not behind even if you're not doing things right now. Everybody is experimenting. Everybody's in experimentation mode. So try new things, and you don't have to. And I helped my niece create her honeymoon itinerary using AI. It doesn't have to be, creating a whole program to start. So, but with that, we would love to open the floor to questions that any of you might have.
Just stick your hand up and I'll come around with the mic.
Thank you. A lot of this has been very interesting. One of the things that you mentioned was moving away from the technical side. And I know that historically, when we think of technical skills, we think about like, databases, programming, and so on. But would it be fair to reframe it as you just need a different set of technical skills? Because I think that a lot of people that I've worked with at different organizations are very good at following a process, but also as soon as they hit a roadblock, the icon is not the color that is in the documentation, immediately stop. And I think that those are the kind of technical skills in terms of creativity, in terms of, when we're talking about it as an ecosystem, it's not direct cause and effect, but you need to understand correlation better. Yeah. You need to be able to isolate what are influencing factors on your outputs, and if you change them, what does it lead to, and how do they interconnect, and so on. And have a vision to a certain extent of, okay, well, how do we systematically do a lot of these things to bring it to scale? Because I think that AI, a lot of people that are experimenting right now are I copy paste this stuff into a ChatGPT and it outputs something. But do they have the structure mentally in terms of vision to say, okay, well, draw from here, transform it this way, match it up to this, and give me the output of that. And then be able to look at that and say, how do we validate that as well to make sure it's right? Because I think that there's a lot of, oh, yeah, like it spat something out, I'll take it. And that's how you get a lot of, some of the more cliche examples, not the one of the learn how to program yourself, but all of the I think there was one about Amazon recently where an author had just basically copy-pasted an entire book out of ChatGPT, but it had included this was generated by the AI, or here's the prompt kind of thing. And people were like,
Truth in advertising.
But it's very clear that you just took it wholesale and didn't critically analyze something. So in terms of the skills required, even though we're moving away from maybe classic technical skills, what are the new, air quotes, technical skills that might be required to really maximize this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the way I would think about it is, again, oversimplifying, I think there may be two kinds of people that have to go through very different kinds of evolution in harnessing this. The ones that I think are going to benefit the most in the short and medium term are those who forget classic technical skills. They're just like masters of the job they do. Like, oh, I've got a field event marketer that knows every single in and out of like how we put together these field events and how we run them. You know, they understand the process, they understand the pain, they're used to getting very creative about how they get around it. But historically, if they wanted anything that was going to be software-based, or I'm going to need this analysis, or I need this thing automated, they would have had to try and translate all their expertise to a human or multiple humans to then like build the things, and you know, time and expense and a lot of that can be done. I think those folks, you know, again, they might not wake up one morning and suddenly be gifted with, oh, and here's how I do this in prompting, you know, to an AI assistant. But like with a little bit of training on that, their ability to take that expertise and apply it in those environments and to be able to validate, you know, that what's happening on the other side is in line with, you know, their expertise. I think those folks are really, it's going to be a golden age for them for these next few years. This other group who are like, okay, they're not yet the experts in their domain. Maybe they're earlier in their career, they're just developing this. You know, that's where I think you're right. The place where we had so often trained people in junior roles to be like, just do it this way. Like, we need to be training them more on how do you think, you know, creatively, you know, how do you be able to do this, you know, how do you cross-validate things? And I won't pretend to know all the answers on how to do this, but I think it is a very different kind of development process that we need to do to be able to make people really effective in that environment.
Any other questions? Sorry, Sarah, were you going to add
Oh,
something?
yeah, I was just going to say, I totally agree. I think that, again, the human in the loop is super important, and understanding the, having that domain expertise when you're thinking about even things like coding assistants, right? You know, Copilot, or, you know, we've recently released some coding assistants for some of our developer tools that we have. I think trust but verify right now is still 100% what you need to be doing. I believe in the coding assistants we've released. They're trained 100% on our libraries. It's definitely going to give a developer a leg up, but that also means now they have opportunity to think about either different, you know, it gives them, where it saves time from a productivity, gives them more opportunity to be creative and innovate from there.
Alyssa, I think you had your hand up. There's another microphone coming that way.
Hi, I'm just standing because I'm so far away. Thank you so much. That was so informative and amazing. I took a ton of notes. I was not texting anyone on my phone. So quick question about how to inspire your teams to adopt this kind of new way of operation, because it's going to be fast and furious. I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and her whole world is Minecraft right now. And I'm pretty sure my 8-year-old learned how to read because of Minecraft, and his strategic thinking skills got significantly better because of it. So how can you inspire and motivate maybe millennials or even older generations on your team to adopt this technology and to really absorb and bring back their creative strategic thinking skills? Because I think that's where we're moving to versus execution mode. And it's a mind bend.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things I've done with my team is give them the opportunity to, again, make it okay to fail, right? So I'm giving you space to run, as I mentioned before with the content, 3 experiments. And for a lot of them, they're all incredibly talented at what they do, and they've been doing it for a while, right? And some of them fall into that millennial age group as well, but having them wrap their head around the fact that it's time to try something different, and it's okay if it doesn't work. And what we've done is created this group where, you know, we're coming together to talk about it, coming together to share those ideas and brainstorm, and then share successes and failures, right? And celebrate both. Because I think if you're celebrating the fact that you've tried something and it didn't work, that's as important as celebrating, because that's where you start getting that spirit of experimentation.
Yeah, and one thing I'd add on is, like, in the tech world for years, they always would have these things of like hackathons, where you get people together for a day or a weekend, you know, to do stuff. And you can kind of have like the non-technical person's version of a hackathon, particularly if you have like a remote or hybrid staff and you're able to just, let's get people together, we're gonna have a day, we're gonna have fun, you know, people form little teams, they start experimenting with things, they're sharing it. Because really it is, at the end of the day, working with this stuff is how you develop that skill. I guess one shout out I'd give is if you don't already follow Ethan Mollick, who's a professor at Wharton, and sort of like almost weekly now is like covering like, oh, here's now what's possible with these things. That's his #1 advice, is you just have to get in and start playing with these things. And so I think anyway, you know, per Sarah's recommendations, you can just get your teams coming together to do that experimentation. It takes a little bit of the activation energy to get over that first hump. But once they do it, it's amazing how many times I've seen teams like, oh yeah, no, this is cool. I wonder, could it do this? Well, let's try it. Like, yeah, it's great.
And giving them the space. I think that's the biggest thing, right? There's so many organizations are running lean. So many organizations are like, but we have to do X, Y, or Z. I think you have to have the time today to experiment with it, or you will at some point. Right now, if you're not experimenting today, but you start tomorrow, you're not going to be behind. If you wait to start experimenting for another, year, I think you will be behind. I think that technology and everything is changing so quickly that you need to be able to have that space. So give them that room. I mean, we've joked about, vibe marketers. There's the vibe coders, sense. Be a vibe marketer, see what happens.
Feeling the vibes.
Exactly.
One more question, and then I promise we'll include a little bit more conversation in the next sessions as well.
Just a quick question, but who's that name that you said to follow, Ethan?
Oh, Ethan Mollick.
Ethan Mollick.
Mollick.
And I love his quote. You've put it in one of the reports, and I'll probably get this not entirely correct, but what he said, if we were to stop, how does that one go? If we were to stop...
if it stopped now,
if
if there was no further AI innovation,
Right. Yep.
it would take like 10 years for companies to absorb the capabilities that have already been created here. And of course, the punchline is, it's definitely not stopping.
It's not stopping, yeah. So start experimenting, yeah.
Well, and I think the point is also that it can feel like I shouldn't start because I'm never going to be able to catch up. And so I think everybody has to just find their place in the moment and do what they can to create their own competitive advantage, right? It's not about trying to be the leader. It's not about trying to get to the front of this line, because you will probably never get there.
And nobody has.
But that's not meant to
has the
be
answers.
scary or daunting. It's just to say everybody's in the same boat and we can all.
You are not behind at this
Exactly.
point.
That's
Like
right.
if you
That's right.
start like now, you are still actually ahead of the vast majority of people.
Nobody has the answer. The only answer is to start experimenting.
Scott, Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.